Welcome, everyone, to the PFF Fantasy Podcast. I'm John Macri, and I'm joined by PFF's lead fantasy analyst, Nate the Great Jahnke. We are live once again on the YouTubes and into the Twitterverse. Nate, we're, about halfway through the fantasy regular season here. Obviously, injuries are never going away, and sometimes, the only way to deal with them is to attack the waiver wire, and that's exactly what we're going to try to do and help the good folks with today. So, how you doing, Nate?
I'm doing well. I won my Scott Fishbowl matchup, even though I only drafted one wide receiver and one tight end, and they were both on bye weeks. So I picked up a wide receiver and tight end. Both got me 0 points, but I still ended up winning without needing a wide receiver or tight end.
Classic. Yeah. Love those 0-point performances. Yeah. Sometimes, even the ones that you don't pick up off the waiver wire are going to get you 0 points or negative points like Chris Olave. But it's it's a fun game that we play here. So there'll be plenty of waiver wire options that we'll talk about and hopefully won't get us 0 points. But we're live as usual. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll get to them as we go through here. And then we'll reference rostership, which is from ESPN. But you can also reference Nate's waiver wire article, which you can find on PFF.com with a PFF Plus subscription, which you could get access to that, as well as all of our tools and resources here at PFF.com. So, Nate, we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with the running backs, where injuries have thrown a wrench into things, right? Like there's a bunch of guys banged up right now. We don't know for sure if they're going to play or not this coming week here, heading into week 7. Some of them are going to be out, but you've done a really kind of nice job of kind of organizing these guys into categories here. And our first category really is kind of our top priority group, where the starters are injured. Their backups are potentially in for larger roles. And there's a bunch of them, really. And we'll start with a player that we've talked about quite a bit here recently because of his increased opportunity in Jacksonville's backfield. But now Tank Bigsby's opportunity looks better than ever, Nate, because Travis Etienne likely to miss some time with a hamstring injury. So we saw, the Bigsby rostership jump from 9.5% last week to 44% this week. It's about to be a lot higher, Nate.
Yeah, like you said, there's been a ton of injuries to running backs. We had 7 inactive this week that were starters. We had 3 running backs get injured that were starters this week, and then another 2 who were injured last week, but their team was on a bye this week. So that's roughly half the league that has their starting running back injured right now. So we're starting with a bunch of running backs that we don't know what their status is going to be for this week. Jacksonville is one of the few teams where we have heard at least some sort of injury news. Travis Etienne is stated to be week to week. So typically when someone's week to week, they will at least miss one game. So Bigsby should be the lead running back this week. We did see Dearness Johnson take a lot of the playing time after Etienne's injury, but a lot of that just had to do with the game script. Jacksonville was losing, so they were using more of their receiving back, which is Johnson, rather than their rushing back, which is Bigsby. Bigsby is at the top of the list, not just because we have some sort of news on how long Etienne might be out, but also because there's a chance Bigsby could remain the lead running back even when Etienne is healthy. Bigsby has looked a lot better than Etienne so far this season, one of the highest graded running backs for us this year, at least in terms of rushing grade. And even though Etienne's grade so far this season has likely been impacted by some injuries, even Etienne at his best isn't grading as well as Bigsby has graded to this point this year. So we have Bigsby at the top of the list for the combination of knowing that Etienne will be week to week, as well as the fact that Bigsby could be the starter even when Etienne is back.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, I know it wasn't, the best week for Bigsby, but like you said, the Bears got out to a nice lead, didn't really allow for a lot of rushing opportunities. So just 7 carries for 24 yards. But we know that he has that big game potential. We saw that as recently as week 5. And if Etienne's going to miss time, we'll get some more value out of Tank Bigsby here. But how about the next guy, Nate? Because we've talked about Tyrone Tracy on pretty much all the waiver wire episodes so far this season, but Devin Singletary missed Sunday night's game as well as week 5, could potentially miss another game, in which case Tyrone Tracy continues to be an enticing option here, Nate.
Yeah, Tracy this week compared to last week was playing even more snaps, played an even higher percentage of the early down snaps, took a little bit more of the third down snaps, which was good to see considering his receiving production. Had a lot of carries, didn't get a ton of rushing production in this game. A lot of the excitement out of him was his work as a receiver out of the backfield. Had a lot of catches in this game, which was good to see. So Tracy, another player who is high on this list among all the running backs who could be starting this week, because Tracy is another player that has a chance to be the starter over the rest of the season. Just comparing year-to-date numbers between Singletary and Tracy, Singletary still grading a little bit better as a rusher, but Tracy grading better as a receiver. If you look at some numbers, Singletary is better. If you look at other numbers, Tracy is better. But there's a chance that the Giants might want to just stick with the running back who has more long-term potential to be the running back on the team for a number of years rather than the player that they added in free agency. My best estimate was that Tracy would get about 60% of the work and Singletary 40%. Once Singletary is back to 100%, but that could swing 30% in any direction. But at the very least, once Singletary is back, they could probably ease him in and still have Tracy have a large role and just wait for Singletary to get to 100% before having a big role again. So Tracy, second on this list out of several running backs who could start this week because he has that long-term potential as well.
Yeah, he's looked. He's been effective, right, in getting the opportunities. Over 30 carries the past two games, and then 17 this past week, which got him 50 yards and a touchdown. But then he got 6 catches as well for 57 yards. So, like the potential there of Tyrone Tracy in New York for sure. Last night we got Monday Night Football between the Bills and the Jets, and James Cook was unavailable for this game. So we saw the rookie running back Ray Davis get his opportunity, and he took 20 carries in this game, went for 97 yards, and then added 3 catches for 55 yards. So it's possible James Cook misses another game. We're not 100% sure on that one, but how do you feel about Ray Davis going forward?
He looked good, particularly early in the game. Late in the game, he didn't get quite as many opportunities, and then late they knew they were running the ball, so didn't do as well on the ground. But we saw Ty Johnson start the game, but after the first 2 plays, Ray Davis basically took the same role that we've seen James Cook have all season long as the early down back, short yardage back, playing some in the 2-minute drill, where Ty Johnson basically returned to his usual role as a third down back. Did get a little bit more opportunities on early downs that typically would have gone to Ray Davis. So Ty Johnson did have a little bit larger role, just not nearly enough to be relevant in fantasy leagues. So Ray Davis is the guy as long as James Cook is out. He did play fairly well over the season. They're a similar situation to the Giants where their rushing grades are pretty similar. Considering the Bills have invested more in James Cook, would not be surprised if Cook remains a starter once he is healthy. But I think Ray Davis has at least earned the opportunity to get a little bit more playing time. So Davis this high on the list because he played well compared to some other backup running backs who didn't play as well, and just because the Bills' offense generally pretty good. So there could be games this season where the Bills are winning by a lot, and both Cook and Davis get a lot of rushing opportunities.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So next guy up, Nate, not only is Christian McCaffrey hurt, but Jordan Mason is now dealing with a shoulder injury. So the speedy rookie, Isaac Guerendo out of Louisville, we haven't seen many touches for the rookie this season, but he handled the season high 10 carries on Thursday Night Football in week 6 with Mason banged up, went for 99 yards. So how are we feeling about Guerendo heading into week 7?
Feeling okay about him. We did hear that Mason was going to at least practice on a limited basis, so that was at least some good news for Mason. And then Isaac also is in the situation where we know he's not going to be the starter long term. Ideally, Christian McCaffrey is back sooner rather than later, as well as Jordan Mason being back sooner rather than later. So while a lot of the running backs we're talking about early have both short and long-term potential, this is very much a short-term opportunity for him. Even when Mason went down, Guerendo didn't see the full early down workload like we saw Mason have. He was splitting some of that time with Patrick Taylor. Isaac's still getting more of the carries, getting more of the opportunities, but we shouldn't expect him to just have that same role that Jordan Mason had. And it's also worth noting they are playing the Kansas City Chiefs this week. So it's a game, most of the time, the 49ers are able to stick to the run for most of the game, get their lead running back between 15 and 20 carries. That might not be the case this week, just depending on how the game script ends up going against Kansas City.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, heading to Minnesota now, where Aaron Jones was banged up heading into the team's week 6 bye week. He was dealing with a hip injury. I think he was practicing yesterday, which is probably a good sign, but doesn't necessarily mean he's a lock to play in week 7. So Ty Chandler could have some fantasy value coming this week, Nate.
Oh, yeah. Chandler took the clear majority of snaps after Aaron Jones was injured a week ago. The initial diagnosis was that the Jones injury wasn't serious. He shouldn't be out too long. Eventually, they did change that to week. So we have had over a week removed from their game. So there's a chance that Jones is ready to go. But I think Chandler being a little bit lower on here, both because there's a higher likelihood Jones is ready to go this week compared to some of the other starting running backs that we've talked about so far. And also Chandler, I don't think has quite as much long-term value. I think once Jones is healthy again, he'll go back to being the clear early down, every down back, basically. So Chandler doesn't have quite that opportunity to potentially win a starting job compared to some of the other running backs we talked about.
Gotcha. All right. Another injury at the running back position. Nate, Ramondre Stevenson missed week 6 with a foot injury. So Antonio Gibson led the way for New England's backfield, 13 carries for a whopping 19 yards. Nate, obviously, the ideal, it wasn't ideal efficiency, but the potential workload is what we're chasing here. Should Ramondre Stevenson miss another game?
Yeah, also had 3 catches in this game, so at least had some value in PPR leagues from that. The thing with Gibson is we know the Patriots offense hasn't always been the most efficient, which is a problem, but Gibson at least has a little bit more long-term potential than some of the last couple running backs we talked about. So if you're looking for a running back specifically for this week, some of the others that we talked about are probably better options, but Gibson has both that short-term potential and his playing time had been on the rise over the course of the past couple weeks, even without the Stevenson injury. So I would not be surprised if this is a 50-50 backfield, even when Stevenson is back. I wouldn't be surprised if Gibson ends up getting more playing time at some point, just depending on how close to 100% Stevenson is. And Gibson was generally looking better as a rusher and a receiver so far this season before the injury. So I think Gibson does have some long-term value, and Drake May got his first start. He did okay early in the game, started getting better later in the game. There's a chance that in general, this Patriots offense improves at some point this season.
Yeah, hopefully. All right. The final backup plan here for an injured starter takes us to Las Vegas, Nate, where we could take a little gamble on Alexander Mattison, who hasn't been the most efficient back since filling in for Zamir White. But hey, he fell into the end zone on Sunday, handled 19 touches, which included 5 receptions. So maybe we could do worse than Alexander Mattison on the waiver wire.
Oh, yeah, it was good to see out of Madison after last week. Amir Abdullah basically took over in the fourth quarter after Madison wasn't very effective as a rusher last week. I think the big thing with Madison is, yeah, if he plays Zamir White misses another game, then Madison should be just fine. But I would not be at all surprised once White is back if he returns to being the clear early down back. Just we've seen now that both White hasn't been effective, but also Madison hasn't been effective outside of one game. The only difference in their grade for the most part so far this season is Madison has the touchdowns where White has fumbled, I think, twice so far this season. So we see a difference in their grade. The touchdowns don't impact Madison's grade as much as the fumbles impact White's grade. But I think we could go back to seeing White. Dylan Labe finally saw the field for a snap and proceeded to fumble his one play, so they didn't bring him back into the game on offense, which was a little disappointing to see. But I would not be surprised if the Raiders keep trying different things until they find a running back who's effective. But at least for the short term, as long as White's out, Madison seems to be the clear early down back.
Yeah, Yeah, somebody's got to emerge there. Hopefully, we'll see what happens. But the next group of running backs consists of three rookies who could get more playing time kind of as the season progresses here. But I think we'll start with Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals, the second rookie running back drafted in the 2024 NFL Draft out of FSU, and now with the Arizona Cardinals. Like I said, he's been getting some work in kind of like weird game script situations, Nate, blowouts and whatnot. But hasn't flashed anything too special, so James Conner maybe isn't in immediate danger of losing his job, but depending on how the season is going for Arizona, maybe they start to turn their attention to younger players to see what they got. And Benson kind of stands out as one of those such players, Nate.
Yeah, it was a weird game this past week. The first half was fairly normal. James Cook getting the early down work, Amari DiMercato getting the passing down work, nothing too out of the ordinary in the first half. It was the second half where Trey Benson got all of the early down snaps on the first drive. There was a report that Connor was getting his ankles taped up, which typically when we see stuff like that happen, it's in the middle of a half and not to start the half. Ideally, Connor could have gotten those taped up throughout the half, but maybe they were getting his ankles checked out more. So maybe there is an injury there. After the game, after that first drive, Connor did come back for 2 plays, proceeded to fumble the ball. And then over the rest of the game, it was DiMercato on the field. Trey Benson took the one other snap that DiMercato wasn't on the field. So Connor only playing those 2 snaps in the second half. Coach said after the game that Connor wasn't playing because of the game script, which was true. It was game script where DiMercato would be on the field regardless of Connor's health. But considering he missed the drive and then he fumbled, there could be an injury there. There could be something there. Benson did have a nice 20-yard run where Connor wasn't very effective throughout this game. So Connor in general hasn't graded quite as well as last season. He's still graded well in general, basically back to where he's been throughout his career. So a chance that Benson maybe gets more playing time, either because Connor hasn't been effective or Connor could be dealing with something. We aren't sure right now, but I think Benson, just the same reason we've wanted him this entire season, is we know Connor's dealt with injuries in the past. So once that happens, Benson would be the clear early down back like he was on the one drive in this game.
Yep, makes perfect sense. Now, how about a rookie who got like a ton of rookie sleeper love post NFL draft? Then things kind of cooled off a little bit, but now he's back. Kamani Vidal of the Los Angeles Chargers came in last game, scored a receiving touchdown with Gus Edwards out and now on injured reserve. So is there a role, I guess, for the 6th round rookie in this offense, Nate?
Yeah, the one injury where we are confident that a player will miss time, and that is Gus Edwards, who is on injured reserve. Everyone else we don't know as much about. So at least we know the extent of one injury. We saw Vidal basically go ahead of Hassan Haskins, who had been the 3rd running back all season, but I believe that's mostly because of special teams work. So Vidal was the 2nd running back in this game. The rotation was basically J.K. Dobbins would come in at the start of drives, and then after a couple of plays, Vidal would rotate in, and they'd continue to rotate just depending on how long the drive was. So they were pretty comfortable using either running back in any situation. We did see Dobbins tending to get more of the work at the goal line and in short yardage, which could have been because they trust Dobbins more there. It could be because just it happened to be where they were during those drives. But I think basically we can trust J.K. Dobbins is the clear running back right now. He had, I think, 26 carries in this game. So they clearly trust Dobbins, but the rotation was one that if Vidal starts playing better than Dobbins, then he has the opportunity to be an every down back for the team, similar to how Dobbins kind of took over from Gus Edwards early in the season. And Dobbins, we do know his injury history, so there is probably at least somewhat more of a chance that Dobbins gets injured at some point this season compared to the normal running back. And with how much he's running with the ball, that also increases the chances of him getting injured at some point. So I'm not putting Vidal anywhere near a starting lineup at this point, because for now it's still J.K. Dobbins backfield, but I do think there could be opportunities this season for Vidal to be the starter.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible. And then another rookie, this time in Miami, who a team that's been dealing with injuries at the running back position themselves already this year between Raheem Mostert and Devin Achane. They're coming out of a bye week where, hopefully those starters have gotten a chance to get healthier. But even if so, Jalen Wright has flashed some potential, Nate, and could work his way into this backfield and get some touches himself.
Yeah, Mostert returned to action last week, so that was good to see for Mostert. Achane suffered a concussion. Hopefully 2 weeks is enough time for him to recover from that concussion and return, but that hasn't always been the case when people suffer concussions, so we'll see. We did see Wright play fairly well in his opportunities a week ago. So far this season, he's been the most effective running back out of the Dolphins running backs. Getting a first down on more carries, more yards per carry, more avoided tackles per carry. And we have seen this Dolphins coaching staff over the years be pretty comfortable changing who their starting running back is, just depending on who's playing the best. So slightly more confident that Wright can end up being a starter out of Miami than a bunch of other running backs where the backup seems to be playing better than the starter. So it's still a 3-headed backfield, though. So that's a bit concerning. So Wright's a lot more of a gamble than a lot of other running backs on this list, but his upside is probably a bit higher than a lot of the other running backs we've talked about as well.
Yeah, he's looked good so far, right? Like I think going into last night, he had an 84.7 rushing grade, which was the second best mark among rookie running backs going into Monday Night Football, again, because he was behind only Braylon Allen. So, he's looked solid here. And like you said, Miami's history of switching up running backs could get him some more work. But the next section of running backs consists of kind of our 4 like typical handcuffs, Nate. Most of whom had good weeks, along with the starters. So, how do we not start with Sean Tucker, who has who was a rookie sleeper last year as a UDFA and barely saw the field, but the man made an impact this week, Nate. 14 carries for 136 rushing yards, added 3 catches for 56 yards and a touchdown. We know how ineffective Rachaad White has been when he's out there, and with Bucky Irving and now even Sean Tucker looking so much better, could we potentially see him and Bucky phase White out of this offense?
It's certainly possible. It seems crazy that a guy had 136 rushing yards and we're like talking about him as the 10th running back or so on the list, but it's just the situation with the Buccaneers backfield. There's definitely a chance that Tucker could get more involved, but I think most likely if that happens, it just becomes a 3-man backfield where it's hard to trust any of the 3 because any one of them could end up having a good week and start playing a little bit more. There's a chance that it becomes a 2-man backfield like it was in this game, but a lot of Tucker's work came in the fourth quarter. He wasn't getting many opportunities early in the game, so it was pretty clear that they were trusting Bucky Irving more than Sean Tucker for a lot of the game. It was just Tucker getting a lot of the work to close out the game, with the Buccaneers scoring 51 points, so they were running the ball well throughout the game, and part of that had to do with the opponent, the Saints, a team that has dealt with a ton of injuries so far this season, so that certainly factors in as well. But we have seen Tucker basically more efficient in this game than we've ever seen Rachaad White in any of the games, and even Bucky Irving was probably more effective in this game than White's been in most of his games in his career. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how the Buccaneers handle this backfield going forward, but there's at least a chance Tucker has a decent role, and there's always a chance someone gets injured, in which case Tucker could have an even bigger role. So mostly taking a chance on Tucker's talent and the fact that he played so well, even though there is not that clear path to opportunities right now.
Yeah, not like the clearest path, but yeah, just wouldn't rule it out, right? Like it doesn't, take a genius to look at the numbers, watch the tape, and recognize that now both of these guys look better than what Rachaad White has been so far this year and even last year. So definitely something to kind of keep an eye on. But we got some big numbers out of the Atlanta backfield as well, Nate, where Bijan Robinson doubled his season's rushing total by making his way into the end zone twice this week. Meanwhile, Tyler Algier, who's on the list this week, handled 18 carries himself for 105 rushing yards and a touchdown. We've covered Algier on here before, and another important handcuff to have rostered, Nate.
Yeah, in general, it seems like the Falcons' backfield has become fairly settled. Whenever the team's playing from behind or it's a neutral situation, Bijan Robinson is getting the clear majority of the work. But anytime it's closer, they're winning games, then Tyler Algier gets rotated in more and more, which makes sense. Both running backs had over 15 carries this week, but Algier had a couple more carries for more yards. They ended up winning the game by 18, so I would not be surprised if this is a similar thing where games where the Falcons are winning, we see both running backs seeing significant work. I don't think at this point, at least, Algier is really cutting into Robinson's playing time. When the games are more important, but the important thing to note with the Falcons is they have one of the easiest schedules over the rest of the year. Even though this was the Carolina Panthers they were facing this week, there's going to be a lot of games that they are facing teams with losing records and are able to get leads and maintain leads throughout the game. So there could be a lot of games this season where Tyler Algier is fantasy relevant, even though Bijan Robinson is still healthy and also fantasy relevant.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And then last night, going back to that game again, Braylon Allen, we've seen him kind of work in a little bit more. Last night, not so much, right? 3 carries for 8 yards. Also had a touchdown called back, but rostered in about 37% of ESPN leagues right now. Nate, how are we feeling about Braylon Allen after this week's game?
Yeah, probably not quite as good. I did move him down the list after the game was finished last night. Part of the reason I had him higher on the list was because they changed coaches, and Allen had been playing so much better than Hall, at least in recent weeks. So there seemed like an opportunity for Allen to potentially get more playing time after the new play caller and new head coach thought differently than the Robert Saleh. But Hall ended up having a great game, 18 carries for 113 yards. Allen, 3 carries for 8 yards. A big thing in recent weeks and this week is we have seen Allen mix in more when the Jets are winning games, and that wasn't happening very much in this game. So that was at least part of the reason Allen wasn't rotated in. But even accounting for that, looking at how much they were rotating the running backs when they were losing in past games compared to last night, Hall still played more than he usually did. So not as high on Allen, but Allen is still someone who has graded very well so far this season. So kind of similar to Tucker in that you are taking a chance on talent and knowing that he's a good running back. And even though the path to playing time isn't there now, it could be in the future.
For sure. So we also saw the return of Joe Mixon in Houston. He missed the last 3 games, but it's his partner, Dameon Pierce, who is rostered in just 3% of ESPN leagues right now, coming off a game where he carried the ball 8 times for 76 yards and a touchdown.
Oh, yeah, it was a pretty clear mix between the two on early downs. I don't expect that to be the case going forward. I do expect Mixon to be taking more of the early down snaps, but I think it was just Mixon returning from injury that he was a little more limited than usual. But it was good to see Pierce play so well on his carries. A big part of that was a 54-yard run, but he still was decently efficient on his other carries as well. So I think the main thing here is that Pierce is the clear handcuff to Mixon. There was a chance that Cam Akers could have kept that role, but Akers seemed to be losing that role over the past couple weeks as well. So I think Pierce is the clear handcuff. So if anything does happen to Mixon, then Pierce would be the guy. And I think it's also somewhat similar to Atlanta in that Houston has been one of the best teams so far this season, 5-1 record. There could be other games this season where they are winning like they are in this one, and they could choose to not run Mixon over and over and over just because he's already dealt with the injury this season, that they also might be likely to give both of their running backs a lot of opportunities when they're winning while sticking more with Mixon in closer games.
Gotcha. Okay, so the last 2 running backs on our waiver list for this week, Nate, a couple of repeat names here: Clyde Edwards-Helaire of the Kansas City Chiefs and Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens, both of whom haven't played yet. But anything changed with either of these 2 guys, Nate, or still looking at them as potential kind of stash options?
Oh, yeah, they're just stash options right now. Edwards-Helaire, hopefully we'll be back this week for Kansas City so we can get some idea what that running back rotation looks like. So now is probably the last week to get him before we see what that role is. Where Keaton Mitchell, we've always thought he's going to return sometime in the middle of the season. It sounds like he's still on pace to do that. So just someone to stash because Baltimore is running so well in case something happens to Derrick Henry.
Gotcha. All right, quick ad break here, and then we will get into the wide receivers. And it's from our friends at DraftKings. The best part of football season, checking out the post-game stats. Which wide receivers scored more than 2 touchdowns? Which quarterbacks threw for less than 350 yards? Think you could pick who will do what before kickoff? Then play Pick Six from DraftKings, an official daily fantasy partner of the NFL. Download the DraftKings Pick Six app, select between 2 and 6 players, and choose if they'll have more or less of a stat. It's that simple. And for all first-time Pick Six players, check this out. New customers play $5 on your first pick set, get $50 in Pick Six credits. Download the new DraftKings Pick Six app now and use code PFF. That's code PFF for new customers to play $5 on your first pick set. Get $50 in Pick Six credits only on DraftKings Pick Six. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick Six not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. One per customer. Non-withdrawable Pick Six credits expire in 6 months. Limited time offer. See terms at picksix.draftkings.com/promos. All right, Nate, let's talk some wide receivers now. And we'll start with one that we covered last week for the Kansas City Chiefs. They had a bye week in week 6, so nothing's changed with Juju Smith-Schuster. But for those that didn't add him this past week because he was on a bye week, what do we like about Juju heading into week 7?
Yeah, I was surprised that he was not rostered in more leagues. I think a big part of that was Kansas City was on their bye week this past week, but still, Smith-Schuster seems to be the clear target outside of Travis Kelce in this offense going forward. Justin Watson, one of the lowest target shares out of all the wide receivers over the past couple of years, so not expecting Watson to see a lot of targets in this offense. And Xavier Worthy has caught a number of deep targets, has caught a lot of passes that are behind the line of scrimmage, but I don't see Worthy being someone who's going to see double-digit targets in a week the same way that Smith-Schuster could. And we saw him get those 900 yards with Kansas City 2 years ago. So they already have a role in this offense that works. And it seems like they're going to be going that path. So Smith-Schuster had the big game. I would not be surprised if he is the player that leads the wide receiver room in targets over the rest of the year. And especially if a team is paying a lot of attention to Travis Kelce, then that frees up Smith-Schuster to be the one to lead the team in targets. So I think out of all the wide receivers on the list, he's the clear one who could be the top wide receiver on his team and is playing with Patrick Mahomes at quarterback.
Yeah, that helps, right? And yeah, like if that last game was any kind of indication, right? Like 8 targets, 7 catches, 130 yards. Nice to see from Juju Smith-Schuster there. So I imagine that rostership will go up now that he's out of his bye week. All right, next up, Romeo Doubs is back in a big way. Nate was suspended by the team for a game, and Dontavian Wicks got hurt. With Doubs back this week, which just kind of opened things up for him even more to make the waiver target list again.
Yeah, it was good to see him score those 2 touchdowns. Good to see his teammates supporting him after those touchdowns as well. After he was suspended last week, seemed unhappy with his role, but it seems like everything is in a better spot now, and maybe even better than what it was going forward after what happened this past week. So I think that's good to see. I think he's at least the top Packers wide receiver in terms of playing time, in terms of routes run. So ideally, he's also someone who can see a high target share going forward. And this Packers offense has looked very good. So I think they will continue to score a lot of touchdowns passing the ball. So I think Doubs is someone who each week should have an opportunity to score a touchdown. Maybe not score 2 touchdowns every week, but hopefully continues to have a higher floor than what he's had recently, especially considering last year he was scoring a ton of touchdowns as well. And with Wicks out, that should be an opportunity for a higher target share.
Yeah, that will definitely help. And then in Dallas, things didn't go great for the Cowboys in week 6. They're heading into a bye with a chance to kind of regroup. And one of those players that's going to have to be a part of that, especially with Brandon Cook still on injured reserve, Jalen Tolbert. Nate, how do you feel about him going forward?
Feeling pretty good. Not the best we got of him. Only caught 4 passes for 43 yards, but certainly could have had a worse week considering how the rest of the Cowboys offense did. has played fairly well so far this season. His snaps have been on the rise. Brandon Cooks on injured reserve, which certainly contributes there. But over the past 5 weeks, averaging 12.6 PPR points, which ranks 34th among wide receivers. So if you would have just kept him in fantasy starting lineups over these past 5 weeks, you would have been fine having him in your lineup compared to a number of other wide receivers. So the fact that he's played so well so far, and ideally the Cowboys offense starts playing better at some point this season as well. So I think Tolbert has plenty of potential. I think the Cowboys should be passing the ball enough that Tolbert should see a lot of targets in a lot of games.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right, let's talk about the Hail Mary recipient from last night's Monday Night Football game, Alan Lazard. Nate, still available in just over 60% of ESPN leagues and had a really big game, 7 targets, 6 catches, 114 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, he just keeps on putting up fantasy production, which is a little surprising, but um, he had all those yards and he still was among one of the top fantasy wide receivers heading into the week. If you just looked at who has scored the most compared to who's available, he'd be the top option, but there's still that concern that Devontae Adams could get traded to the team. That would probably push Lazard to third on the depth chart. They have been getting the ball to Garrett Wilson a lot in recent weeks. So even though Lazard was the only wide receiver producing early in the season, these past couple weeks, Wilson has been producing a lot more, also got 100 yards and a touchdown in this game. So I think the only reason I didn't push Lazard higher on this list is that fear that Devontae Adams could get traded. I know there were reports of the Raiders saying, hey, we might end up keeping Adams, but I also would not be surprised if that's just a trade tactic to try getting a team to be willing to trade more. And it's also a situation where Adams' contract, each week he's not traded, that's more money that the Raiders have to pay him and less money that the new team has to pay him. So I also wouldn't be surprised if this takes a couple more weeks, in which case it's easier to trade for Adams. So I'm not all that surprised that he hasn't been traded yet because of the salary situation. So that's the only reason I'm not higher on Lazard right now, is that fear of Adams. If we knew that if Adams got traded to another team, for example, I think Lazard would probably be second on this list.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And yeah, the Devontae Adams thing, it feels like it's going to happen. I don't know, but we Aaron Rodgers likes to get his guys in there, and Lazard is one of them right now. So for now, at least, he does look like a pretty good option. But next up is a rookie who we've talked about previously, as he's kind of earned a larger role in the Carolina Panthers offense. Xavier Legette, that is, scored another touchdown this week, and once again got on his horse to celebrate. How are things looking usage wise for the first round rookie, Nate?
They are looking fairly good. He's on the field the clear majority of the time. There was some concern last week. He was dealing with an injury, so that kept him out for a lot of the game, which is why his snaps declined so much last week. But it was good to see him back this week. Just a case of a rookie wide receiver who's available in a lot of leagues, has shown some flashes so far this season, and the opportunity for snaps is there. So certainly a chance that he improves over the second half of the season. A lot of the wide receivers who are rookies and getting playing time are already on rosters. So I think if you want to take a chance on someone who has a clear chance to improve over the course of the season, I think Legette's probably the best option.
Yeah, I like that one. All right, Nate. Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals makes the list here. I know Marvin Harrison Jr. Left this past game with a concussion, but Wilson has a role in this offense, even with Marvin Harrison Jr. in the lineup. We talked about him in start sit this past week. He's been really effective against zone coverage in his NFL career, and was again this past week where he scored the lone touchdown for the Cardinals, but could have a bigger role if Marvin Harrison Jr. misses some time as well.
Yeah, he has 42 PPR points over the past 4 weeks, ranks 37th among wide receivers. So he has been right around that borderline fantasy starter status. I think a big thing with him and some of the other wide receivers in this range is a lot will just depend on how good the offense is doing. The Cardinals offense has struggled a little bit recently, but I think if the Cardinals offense starts playing better, then there's room for Wilson to have a bit more fantasy value. The clear third option in the offense outside of Harrison and Trey McBride at tight end. So typically teams that are really on offense can support 3 fantasy relevant receivers. Teams that aren't so good aren't able to maintain 3 fantasy relevant receivers. So I think a lot just depends on how the Cardinals are doing.
Yeah, makes sense. And yeah, I'm looking at the schedule next week. They play on Monday Night Football. Do we have 2 Monday Night Football games again next week? It
We
looks
do, and one is at 9 p.m. Eastern, so I will be more tired than usual when we do this
what?
podcast next week.
Oh my God, what are we doing? So frustrating. All right. Next up, the New England Patriots. They made a move at quarterback, like we said. This past week, we finally got to see Drake May get his first NFL start. And his number one target in that game, rostered in just 21% of ESPN leagues right now, is Demario Douglas, who saw 9 targets, catches 6 of them for 92 yards and a touchdown. Nate.
Oh yeah, he was a very interesting one to figure out where to place on this waiver wire list, because he has been the clear target for New England so far, but he still is typically only playing in the slot in 11 personnel, and that's okay when a team is running a ton of 11 personnel. There are some teams like Atlanta or the Rams that just live in 11 personnel and rarely leave it. The Patriots have a surprisingly low amount of 11 personnel use. They're right around league average. Considering their record, I would have expected them to be higher than league average, because you'd expect them to be behind in games, so a lot more passing late in games to catch up, but they've been right around league average in terms of 11 personnel usage, and Douglas is only on the field in those situations, so that makes it harder for him to run enough routes to consistently see these targets. I think there's a chance that if the Patriots keep losing games like this and don't have a clear outside target emerge, then Douglas could continue to have fantasy value. But I'm concerned that if the Patriots start doing a little bit better, then they stick to more 12 personnel usage. Douglas isn't on the field as much, or one of the outside wide receivers emerges. Basically, all of them have had between 0.35 and 0.5 yards per route run this season, outside of Keyshawn Boudy, who became the clear starting outside wide receiver this past week. So maybe he emerges as the outside option, which would be surprising. But if that happens, then he becomes the waiver wire target in this offense.
Interesting. Yeah, just going to be continue to be kind of a mess to sort out here, but I like the thought process there, and we'll see kind of how this offense looks with Drake May at quarterback going forward. Next up, Gabe Davis of the London Jaguars, who scored 2 touchdowns in Week 6. What do we like about Big Gabe, Nate?
Oh, yeah. Typically, when someone scores a lot of fantasy points, it takes a bit for him not to show up on the waiver wire article. And Davis, because he has that clear role in the offense, he is the clear outside receiver outside of Brian Thomas. The Jaguars, even though they have struggled in general, their offense has played decent at times throughout the season, and I think they can continue to play well. Davis, we know that he's been inconsistent throughout his career in terms of the roles he's had in offenses, sometimes rarely seeing targets, but when he is seeing targets, a lot of the time he's scoring touchdowns. So because he scores a lot of touchdowns, it's hard to ignore him or fantasy from that perspective. But there will be weeks where he doesn't do anything and weeks where he does a lot. So it's hard to put him in fantasy starting lineups. But there's at least a chance he becomes more consistent in this offense going forward. So because there is a chance that he continues to play well, and he has put up some numbers so far this season, has been dealing with an injury, which has impacted him the last couple weeks as well. So I don't think at this point he's gotten a fair shot in this Jaguars offense because of the injury and because it's only been a couple weeks into the season.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think he had another target in the end zone as well, if I remember it. I think he dropped it or something like that. So had a chance for potentially 3 touchdowns in this one. So next up, the Rams waiver wire duo of Tutu Atwell and Jordan Whittington, coming off a Week 6 bye week. Nate, we know Cooper Kupp is working out to try and come back from that high ankle sprain that's kept him sidelined here since Week 2. But in the meantime, what do we think about these Rams wide receivers?
Yeah, they might have one more good week in them. I think Cooper Kupp, it sounds optimistic that he will play this week. But even if he does, there's a chance he's limited. Not all players who return from injury immediately return to an every down role. So I think it's certainly possible that he gets eased in, which means Atwell and Whittington should see significant playing time. They'd probably be rotating for one of the or two of the roles. And then once Puka Nacua is back, then they're only rotating for one role. So unlike basically, I think every other wide receiver on this list who probably has long-term value throughout the season, these Rams wide receivers are probably just short-term options. But if you are looking for a short-term option who's available in a lot of leagues, I think either one of these wide receivers could have a good week, specifically this week.
Gotcha. Yeah, and just to kind of follow up too from the Packers conversation, we did get a question here about the Green Bay wide receivers, saying, "Hey guys, I'm getting burned by constantly adding and dropping Packers receivers chasing gold. I get it. Glad you mentioned Romeo Doubs. I think Christian Watson or Dontavian Wicks are worth owning as well. And then I guess which one would you prefer of those two? And I know Wicks kind of got banged up there this past week, but Christian Watson also been banged up this season. So any preference for the two, Nate?
It's probably Watson at this point, just because Watson is the one who's healthier of the two. And when the two were both healthy, it was Watson who was getting more of the playing time. So I think out of the two, it's Watson. But because we're probably back to a point where the two are rotating once both are healthy, it's harder to trust either of them. But I agree, it was frustrating situation where it seemed like Wicks finally got the opportunities because he was healthy and Watson wasn't. And then Watson returned a lot sooner than expected. And then Wicks proceeded to get injured. And I believe the reports are he's week to week. So I would pick Watson. I think Watson has more short-term value, probably rivals Doubs in terms of his value over these next couple weeks. But the reason I included Doubs, not Watson, is because Doubs is available in more leagues right now, but perfectly fine to pick up Watson. I just don't think he'll have as long-term a value because the two were rotating so much when both were healthy.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So on the other side of things, the Commanders are, I guess, still trying to figure out their wide receiver 2 situation. It feels like it's a different player assuming that role every week. And this week, Nate, it was Noah Brown going for 58 yards receiving, rostered in about 1% of ESPN leagues. So what did you notice with Noah Brown this week?
Oh, yeah. Brown missed a week ago, so I think that was a big reason we've seen the Commanders be a little inconsistent in who's that wide receiver. But I think Brown has won that number 2 job outside or opposite of Terry McLaurin. I had a couple nice catches in this game. I think his playing time was a little bit limited because he was coming back from injury. I think he'll see at least a little more playing time going forward, but Washington also seems comfortable rotating all of their wide receivers in and out a little more often. Even Terry McLaurin, even though he's having great games recently, has been playing a little bit less than we're used to. So it seems like that's working, getting him off the field. We see Miami do this as well with how good Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are. They rotate out more than most wide receivers and are just more efficient on their routes, even though it hasn't been as good without Tua recently. But a similar thing with the wide receiver rotation. So I think with how good the Commanders offense has been playing, there's a chance that they can have 3 good passing options, in which case Brown is the third outside of McLaurin and Zach Ertz at tight end. So he's caught a couple of passes in all this game so far. So there's a chance he emerges and becomes an even bigger option. But so far, he at least has a decent floor.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right. Oh, here we go, Nate. I've been waiting for this one. Denver Broncos rookie wide receiver Troy Franklin, who scored a touchdown this week. By the way, and I guess you've included Devon Vele in here as well. He did pretty good for himself. But let's be honest, it's Troy Franklin season, right, Nate?
It could be either one of their seasons. The big thing here is Josh Reynolds. A hand injury did land on injured reserve, so he will be missing at least the next 3 games. Seemed like his role was on the decline a little bit anyway. And then Lil Jordan Humphrey, who had been the number 2 or number 3 wide receiver all season, had a decrease in snaps this week, was the number 4 wide receiver. So we saw Troy Franklin, who had been the number 4 for the past couple weeks, step up and be one of the 3 starters. And then Devon Vele, who had a strong week 1, caught 8 passes, then had an injury, missed week 2, and then was inactive for a couple weeks, was the 6th wide receiver, and they chose not to have 6 wide receivers active. He became active, and that meant he surpasses both Marvin Mims and Jordan Humphrey to be one of the top 3 wide receivers as well. Also has a number of catches in this game, so they're both young wide receiver or rookie wide receivers who are having significant roles in offenses, and an offense where outside of Cortland Sutton, there's not a lot of options in the passing game. Greg Dulcich, who was their lead tight end the first 4 weeks, has been a healthy and active the past 2 weeks. They seem to be very willing to change what they're doing from 1 week to another. So there's a chance that either one of these wide receivers emerges as a clear number 2 option. And Cortland Sutton hasn't had the greatest season so far, so a chance that one of them could become like a 1B option rather than just a 2 option.
There we go. So yeah, Sean Payton seeing the light here, and like we've talked about before, Troy Franklin has that connection with Bo Nix as well, being his top college wide receiver there at Oregon. So maybe there's some hope for Troy Franklin. But then last wide receiver for today, Nate, for those deep leagues, Bub Means of the New Orleans Saints. He is not rostered in many leagues at all at this point, but saw an increased role this past week. So how are we feeling about Bub Means?
Feeling good specifically for this week. I was writing the recap article, and typically I start writing around, or I take a lot of notes before the games, but then around the third quarter of those games, with Chris Olave getting ruled out, I wrote about this blurb early and then changed it, and then changed it again, and then changed it again throughout the writing process. So that was an interesting one. So Chris Olave took a helmet hit, suffered a concussion, left him out for the rest of the game. So Bub Means took over as the X receiver. It was a little surprising considering he had seen so little playing time, and it seemed like declining playing time. But Means is an X receiver like Olave, where the other receivers more slot options or Z receiver options. So it made sense for Means to replace Olave. Had a number of targets, caught 5 passes for 45 yards in this game, so was getting a decent role in the offense. Means did suffer an injury at one point, but then returned fairly quickly to the game, so that didn't seem to be a concern. The big thing here is the Saints play on Thursday Night Football, so typically we see sometimes a player is able to return from a concussion the following week, but because it's a shorter week, it seems a bit less likely that Chris Olave is ready to go. So even Rashid Shaheed showing up on the injury report yesterday, so Means could be the top receiver option for the Saints this week. The big thing there is they are playing the Denver Broncos. The Broncos, a team that have typically been fairly good at shutting down wide receivers, but then in the later games, Patrick Surtain II had a concussion. So similar thing, because it's a concussion on a short week, unlikely he's able to play this week. So the Broncos probably not as good at stopping wide receivers. So if you are in one of these deeper leagues where you need a wide receiver specifically for this week, Means is probably a fairly good option.
Yeah, it's the perfect Bub Means storm here, kind of brewing as, like you said, Patrick Surtain, Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave, all banged up, and it's a short week. So never know. If you're in a desperate spot, Bub Means could be an option here. So quick ad break before we get into the last 2 positions, and want to let you know that this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Think of a time recently when you didn't feel like you could be your full self, like you were hiding behind a mask. October is the season we're wearing masks and costumes, but some of us feel like we wear a mask and hide more often than we want to. At work, in social settings, around our family, therapy can help you learn to accept all parts of yourself so you can take off the mask, because masks should just be for Halloween fun, not for our emotions. Therapy can be really useful to get a better understanding of how your mind actually works and to become more aware of your own patterns of behavior and how to improve them. It's useful for everybody, not just people struggling with something specific. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is a convenient, flexible, and entirely online way to get therapy that's right for you. You just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Take off the mask with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/PFFfantasy to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/PFFfantasy. All right, Nate, let's talk some tight ends now, led by the most familiar face on this list, who can maybe move up the rostership board if he could get back on the field again, since he's missed another game now. Talking, of course, about Taysom Hill of the New Orleans Saints playing in Thursday Night Football. Is there a chance we could see some Taysom Hill return this week?
It looks like there's a chance on the injury report he was just limited in practice, so he was not one of the 7 players who did not practice. Even though it wasn't a real practice, it was just a practice estimation. But they estimated that Hill would be limited in practice this week, which is a decent sign that he could be ready to go this week. He's someone that when he's healthy, he has looked even better than he has in past seasons. In week 4, when he was healthy, played 15 of a possible 25 snaps. So that 60% snap rate is a bit higher than we have ever seen out of Hill before, outside of when he's been a clear quarterback. Scored 2 touchdowns in that game. Don't expect him to score 2 touchdowns every game, but expect him to have a decent role. Alvin Kamara, one of the players on the Saints that is also on the injury report, limited with a hand injury, so they could want Hill to run the ball a bit more in this game. They have been making changes to their backup running backs as well. Jamal Williams not seeing as much playing time. Kendre Miller at least on the active roster, but was not or on the 53-man roster, but was inactive for this game. So I think that Hill can continue to be the clear second running option on the team. And if Kamara is not 100%, then Hill could see even more work as a rusher. So Hill, I think, even though tight ends in general have gotten a little bit better, other guys have gotten healthier, players who haven't played well early in the season have started to play better. I could very well see Hill being a top 12 fantasy tight end over the rest of the season if he stays healthy.
Yep, I like it. And then another repeat name from the list of waiver targets passed, Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, scored a touchdown this past week, still rostered in just about 24% of ESPN leagues. Nate.
Yeah, he remains the clear traditional tight end that I prefer off the waiver wire if you need someone for a bye week. His role has been very consistent over the past 2 years. This was oddly enough the game where he played, was taken off the field the most, but a lot of that was just late in the game because it was a blowout. Didn't need him on the field. So I think his role should be just fine going forward. Has been playing some of his better football in his career these past couple weeks. Also in the playoffs last year was playing very well. So still only 25 years old, still room for improvement. But I think because there are so many other tight ends where the role is more inconsistent from one week to another, I think Otton's the safest option if you have a tight end with a bye week.
Yep, makes sense. And then the next name is Noah Fant of the Seattle Seahawks, who posted a season high 63 yards in week 6 on Thursday Night Football. He's rostered in just 6% of ESPN leagues right now.
Oh yeah, season has been a little bit of a roller coaster. Started the season with the best role he's had in a long time, but then Pharaoh Brown was healthy and they stopped using him nearly as much in 12 personnel, which is generally a concern. But then Fant has still remained the clear tight end in 11 and 12 personnel, still rotated out a little bit more than you would like to see, since they like to give some of their other tight ends opportunities. But he had that good game this week. The 6 catches for 60 plus yards. He's done that in 2 games this season, but he also has 4 games under 5 PPR points. And considering the talent Seattle has at wide receiver, it wouldn't be surprised if Fant is someone who has a good game once every 3 weeks and then doesn't do much the other 66% of the time. So I think he is a decent option because he can have those good games, but unless there's an injury to a wide receiver, I don't see Fant being as consistent of an option.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And then the next name up is Grant Calcaterra of the Philadelphia Eagles, who makes the list because imagine that we have another injury at the tight end position. It was Dallas Goedert who went down early in week 6. So Calcaterra is the next man up in Philadelphia, Nate.
Yeah, Dallas Goedert went down within the first minute of the game. There were so many injuries that it was like early first quarter that they went down. So a really rough week, especially if you had multiple of those guys in your lineup. But Grant Calcaterra, throughout the preseason, throughout early in the season, it became pretty clear that he was the number 2 tight end option of the team, at least in receiving situations. Also has ended up being the number 2 in 12 personnel as well for most of the year. So he basically took over Dallas Goedert's role for the rest of the game, caught 4 passes for 67 yards, which was pretty good to see. I am skeptical in general just because the Eagles, a lot of the reason that Dallas Goedert has been a fantasy relevant tight end is one, his talent, has been one of the highest graded tight ends, and also just the target share. He's had a fairly high target share over his career, not quite as high once A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith have been on the team, but still better than a lot of other teams. We saw Goddard miss a number of games last year, and the tight ends that they used basically did nothing in that offense. So now that I do think there's a chance that this will be different this time around. Calcaterra was a rotational backup even when that injury happened. So the fact that he has earned this backup role and has been pretty much undoubtedly that player, and he had a good game this week, there's a chance that Calcaterra can be a little different. But with A.J. Brown in the offense, with Devontae Smith in the offense, it's hard to see him having any kind of consistent target share. And we also don't know how the extent of Goddard's injury to this point. If Goddard's out for the season, then I think Calcaterra is definitely someone that you can prioritize a little bit more, but there's a chance that this could only be a 1 or 2 week thing. There's even a chance that Goddard could be back immediately.
Yeah, let's hope he's back right away. And then for those deep leagues, Eric All, who we talked about last week, and his usage kind of increasing. How did things look for this week for the rookie tight end out of Iowa, Nate?
This was the first week that All had run more pass routes than Mike Gesicki, so that was a little good to see. Still a bit of a rotation at tight end, so it's not a great situation, but All, at least over times, has graded well so far this season. Hasn't graded quite as well recently, but still a young, talented player that has a chance to see more playing time. And with Joe Burrow at quarterback, that could lead to good things. So we basically had tight end sleepers in Cincinnati for a number of years now. All is the next player in line, but instead of it being a veteran option that they're trying out, that we've seen what they're up side of those tight ends are in the past, All as a rookie who we know is talented, so there's a chance that he could emerge at some point this season.
Gotcha. All right, quarterback time, and I cannot believe the quarterback of America's team, the Detroit Lions, is rostered in fewer than 50% of ESPN leagues. Nate, Jared Goff should definitely be a waiver wire ad where he's available, especially after that beating of the Dallas Cowboys in Week 6.
Yeah, this is hopefully one where most of the people listening have Goff rostered in the leagues that you're in, but there are a number of leagues where he is available. So I do want to talk about him just for those couple of leagues where he is available. Had a huge game this week. He, even over the first 5 weeks, he was quarterback 16 in terms of points per game and was drafted as quarterback 15. So I'm not exactly sure why people were dropping him, outside of the fact that the Lions had their bye week the week before. So that probably was the main contributing factor, and not enough people picked him up after their bye week was over. So had that really good game, and simply is going to be one of the better high-end backup quarterbacks in fantasy over the rest of the season. So if you need a second quarterback, Goff is certainly someone worth considering.
Yep, with you. And then Trevor Lawrence of the London Jaguars, still on the list. Nate had a decent game in a losing effort in Week 6, 234 yards and a touchdown. But we like the path for more relevant fantasy performances going forward.
Yeah, Lawrence has graded decently well recently, so that's been a good sign. Has also been putting up good numbers in the passing game, and with the Jaguars losing, they are passing the ball a lot, which also helps. So Lawrence should continue to see a lot of opportunities and is grading well and has a lot of good receivers. Evan Ingram's back, had a good game. We talked about Gabe Davis, who had the good game. We've seen in past weeks, Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk also play well. So they have plenty of good receiving options and a good quarterback. So I think Lawrence can continue to have some good games. Their schedule is fairly neutral over the rest of the season, so not a lot of matchups where he clearly should be in fantasy lineups, but also not a lot of matchups where he clearly should be on the bench. So just a lot depends on your quarterback situation, but definitely someone who, after your quarterback has a bye week, Lawrence can probably fill in regardless of the matchup.
Gotcha. And then next up, Tua Tagovailoa is slated to return at some point, hopefully wearing a Guardian cap. But Miami will be at least one more week without their quarterback coming out of the bye. But we should expect to see Tua back on the field at some point this season.
Yeah, the big thing is we don't know when. We know for a fact that he will not play this week because he is ineligible to, because he's on injured reserve. Coach said that he is going to play this season, which was good to see. They said it wouldn't be this week. Didn't mention that it was because he's ineligible this week, so it's hard to know if they said that because he's ineligible or if he would not be ready this week. So we don't know exactly when he'll be back, but he was a top 10 quarterback in week one, was a top 10 quarterback for last season as well. So I would not be surprised if he's able to return to the form that he had in the past, where he's basically a fantasy starter with the weapons he has in the offense. So I think he's worth picking up now, stashing on the roster, and could be a fantasy starter once he is healthy.
Yep. Let's hope so. And then rookie QB Drake May of the New England Patriots gets on the list after his first NFL start. Nate threw 3 touchdowns in a losing effort, a couple of picks as well. But we also saw some rushing upside from May, rostered in just 4% of ESPN leagues right now.
Yeah, definitely had that slow start in the first quarter, only completed 1 pass to the Patriots and 1 pass to the Texans, so it wasn't great from that perspective, but did play a bit better over the rest of the game. So a lot of his bad grade was from the first quarter, so I'm not too concerned about his grade being where it is right now. I think it was a generally promising start. Like you said, had that rushing upside as well, and also was going to include him in the list regardless because he is playing Jacksonville this week. Jacksonville over the first 5 weeks of the season allowed the most fantasy points to quarterbacks, and the gap between them and number 2 increased this week after they allowed even more passing touchdowns. So a chance May has a good week considering his opponent.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. We saw Caleb Williams light them up. And we did get a question actually around Drake May, so I'll add that in here. And the question is, I have Mayfield, Mahomes, and May. Would you drop Mahomes to make room for Cooper Kupp coming back?
I would probably drop May for Cooper Kupp coming back. You definitely want Kupp on your roster and probably don't need 3 quarterbacks. Mayfield is probably the one you're starting at this point, but I'd probably trust Mahomes to improve once he gets more chemistry with his new set of wide receivers rather than May. So I would probably drop May out of that group of 3.
Yeah, I'm with you. And yeah, nice that Mahomes has already had his bye week as well. So we'll be starting every game as long as he's healthy here. And then last name on our quarterback list here, the meme lord Will Levis, who just continues to make the highlight reels for the wrong reasons this season, but maybe there's some hope for him down the road, Nate.
Yeah, it'll probably be at least another month before I give up on him at this point of the list because a lot of the same things that I talked about last week. His schedule was brutal to start the season. He has been dealing with the injury. He has a new coach, new receivers, so on and so forth. But the schedule over the rest of the season is beautiful. Starting in week 12, they face Jacksonville twice, Indianapolis, Washington, Houston, and Cincinnati. That's 4 teams against defenses that are among the top 5 at allowing fantasy points to quarterbacks. Also the 7th and 13th most. So all favorable matchups, some very favorable matchups. So if Levis does manage to turn things around over the next month or so, there is a chance that he could have a very strong final third of the fantasy season.
Nice. Like that call. All right. That's going to do it for us. Thank you all very much for tuning in. So make sure you get out there and put those waiver claims in. And big shout out to the PFF Fantasy Data Collection team, as always, for grinding the stats all weekend long and putting all these numbers together for us so that we can utilize them in this show. Nate, thank you to you as well for putting this together. And you do have something else going on here. I see you've maybe got some breaking news for us.
Second straight week that the Jets are giving us breaking news right while we're trying to wrap up the podcast. The Raiders are finalizing a trade for Davante Adams.
Whoa.
To the Jets per multiple sources, Adams reuniting with Rodgers. Ian Rappaport just tweeting out the second. It's a conditional 3rd rounder going to the Raiders. So wow. We talked about Allen Lazard earlier, and I am probably moving him back down the list for the reasons that we talked about a half hour ago.
That's crazy. Okay, so yeah, Davante Adams. There you go. Reuniting with Aaron Rodgers. Again, like I said, it just felt like it was going to happen, right? We know Aaron Rodgers has some influence here in the NFL, and he's going to get his favorite wide receiver back. Probably, Garrett Wilson obviously been had a really nice game. This has got to affect Garrett Wilson's target share here as well, and like you said, specifically Allen Lazard. But maybe we could get some 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers going forward and turn things around here for the Jets, who coming off a loss here. If they could have made a field goal, that could have helped. But nice to see Devontae Adams. Hopefully, that hamstring heals up now that he's on the Jets and reunited with Aaron Rodgers. I imagine it will. Very exciting breaking news. So yeah, shout out to the Jets for doing that at the same time basically as last week.
Yeah, we'll also say if you have Tyler Conklin, you can probably drop Conklin. No, he was also dealing with an injury, but he barely saw any targets in this game. Only had a couple of games where he's had a decent number of targets. Has been getting rotated out in 12 personnel a little bit more, and now he becomes a very clear fourth or fifth option on pass play. So don't see him having enough targets to be fantasy relevant. And then Mike Williams becomes the clear fourth receiver, and the offense probably isn't going to see much of any playing time going forward. I don't think they can really get rid of him all that easily with his contract, but probably stuck as the fourth receiver. And because it's harder to trade him, if you were holding out hope for Mike Williams, you can probably drop him from your roster as well.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. Well, there we go. Some excitement to end the show, Nate. But before you go, please do remind everybody else what you have going on PFF.com this week.
Sure. So on the website right now, have my recap for all of the games this past weekend, have the waiver wire article. We'll probably try to update it if I can, if there is any injury news throughout the day, because I know it is a crazy injury day. And if there is news, that could very much affect which running backs you want to be targeting. Because as we said, we don't know basically when any of these running backs are coming back. Also have the 5 to add, 5 to drop, 5 to buy low, 5 to sell high up. Rest of season rankings are up today. Will have my rankings for this upcoming week sometime this afternoon. Might be slightly later than usual just because of all this injury information, and it's hard to know who I should be projecting to play and not play. So I'm guessing it'll take me a little bit longer than usual, but that will be up today. And then we'll have start sit up on Thursday like usual.
Nice. As for me, I'll have the IDP fantasy report that'll be out shortly today, followed by the wide receiver man zone coverage report on Thursday, as well as IDP rankings, and the offensive line, defensive line matchups to target and avoid will be out on Friday. And then I'll be back in the podcast feed doing the week 7 IDP preview. That'll be out likely Thursday morning. Week 7 start sit show with Nick Bodiford will be out Thursday later in the day. So be sure to check those out as well. And until next time, peace out.